Hello, and welcome to the Season 3 premiere episode of No Wrong Choices, a podcast about the adventures of life that explores the career journeys of successful and interesting people. I'm Larry Samuel, soon to be joined by the other fellas, Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea. I want to start off today by thanking everybody who's come along on our journey to date. Our podcast is growing beyond our expectations, which has really been great. And, y'all are making that happen for us. So thank you so much. For those who might be joining us for the first time, and for anyone else who hasn't done this yet, please support us by following No Wrong Choices on your podcasting platform of choice and by giving us a 5-star rating. We also ask that you join our community by following along on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and now X by searching for the No Wrong Choices podcast. You can also connect with us at NoWrongChoices.com. This episode features retired U.S. Navy SEAL and the current chairman of the Undersea Warfare Academic Group at the Naval Post Graduate School, Doug Horner. This should be a fascinating discussion. Larry Shea, why don't you lead us into this one?
You said a mouthful, if titles have anything to do with it. This is a guy who we're super excited to talk to because he doesn't just have one area of expertise, he has a couple, and they're both top-level, fascinating things, fascinating careers, right? I mean, people spend their whole life in the military. He's a Navy SEAL. People spend their whole life in robotics. He specializes in underwater robotics and other fascinating things. So you're talking about a guy who is super physical to be a SEAL, super smart to be a SEAL, and then uber smart to be in the world of robotics. This is someone I want to meet. This is someone I want to find out how they got to where they are, and someone who's at the top of a lot of fields. So fascinating to talk to Doug Horner.
Right, so there's a couple things that we're going to talk about here. Is that, one, we're going to have the opportunity to talk with someone in the special operators field, right? So these are like the elite of the elite when it comes to warriors in our military. But it's not just that. It's, when you look at this guy's resume and you see that this man is now involved in the idea of robotics and artificial intelligence and machine learning, well, he's on the cutting edge, the absolute cutting edge of the future of the military. So it's not simply what he did as a warrior. He continues to be a warrior and taking that idea of what is warfare into the future. And that is fascinating beyond belief. That's sci-fi stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a 30-plus year perspective that began in the field in the most advanced of ways, and now he's literally creating the future of robotics for the military in a way. So with that, this should be absolutely fascinating. Here is Doug Horner. Now joining No Wrong Choices is a retired U.S. Navy SEAL and current chairman of the Undersea Warfare Academic Group at the Naval Post Graduate School, Doug Horner. Doug, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. You said it so eloquently the second time as well.
Well, it's very funny. I was going to say it took me so long to get that out of my mouth. What does that actually mean? What is your role?
My role at the postgraduate school, there's a curriculum that is called the Undersea Warfare Academic Group. And so what happens is students come, typically submariners, but also a variety of students from different warfare specialties. They come and they come to this curriculum that's known as Undersea Warfare, and they get to choose between 10 different curriculum programs, master's programs at the postgraduate school. It includes stuff like mechanical engineering, physics, and electrical engineering, and then they add to that courses that are associated with undersea warfare. So sonar, tactical oceanography, which deals with the very interesting space of the ocean, and robotics. And so I'm kind of in charge of that.
You sound like you have the coolest job ever. Okay,
I love this job. It's a great job.
It sounds great. And first of all, it might be a bit insulting, but Hunt for Red October is one of my favorite movies, and those Tom Clancy books. And a lot of what you're saying sounds a great deal of what obviously those books were about. There was a book that's one of my favorites. It's about the Silent Service. It's about the Silent Service, submarine service, and a great deal of those, the tales of submariners and the great tales during the Cold War, etc. So It just sounds like one of the best jobs ever.
I think you're talking about Blind Man's Bluff, aren't you?
Yes, Blind Man's Bluff. Thank you for reminding me. Oh my God, one
Yeah,
of my
great
favorite
book,
books.
right?
One of my favorite books. So let me get back to my original question, which was, as a younger man. So you obviously are an unbelievably smart person. This is without doubt. Were you always into? Let's say, tinkering with, whether it be robotics or just tinkering in general, and you wanted to have like that, an athletic background, and you wanted to have a background of, I want to do something more with my life and then incorporate that into my future? Or was it just that, look, I just love to tinker with stuff and then I'll find my way later on?
Yeah, so there's small elements of each of those, but I wasn't really like a mechanical kid growing up. But I did like take apart a telephone. I was super interested in those dial-up telephones and how they worked. And so my mom gave me a telephone and said, "Have at it." And obviously I still remember that. But growing up, I didn't matriculate towards engineering. And my undergraduate was at Boston University in mathematics and a second degree in economics. And I was thinking business. And then I went from there over into an investment company called Colonial Mutual Funds in Boston, and did sales for them for 3 years. So I didn't start off with the idea that I would be ending up where I'm at right now. It's been kind of a strange, fun progression.
And that's a good thing, right? Because sometimes that rounds us out and makes us who we are. I do want to go back to the beginning, though, because, this is a show about the genesis of where our dreams come from and achieving them. And I think it's important to kind of go back and talk a little bit about before, it sounds like you had both, a mind for becoming a Navy SEAL, and there had to be some physical ability. So take me back to the beginning. Obviously, what kind of led you down to the SEAL path? You could tell that story in your own way, but also the physical aspect of it, because, just in preparing for this interview, to read what it takes to be a Navy SEAL is just superhuman. So I want to start from the beginning, maybe to when you were a child or a teenager or what have you, and in your own way, just tell your story about how you went on that path.
Yeah, I think it starts with all the time that I spent in or near the water. And so for years, I grew up in a place called Lewisboro, New York. And our mom would drop us off at the pool. And I would spend my summers swimming and playing ping pong and playing a little bit of tennis in there as well. And I just really enjoyed that. Had a great friends set and did that for probably 5 or 6 years growing up. And so that transitioned over into becoming a competitive swimmer. And as a competitive swimmer through high school, I graduated as an all-state swimmer. And then that kind of got me into collegiate sports with swimming again. But I didn't do it very long because I was so burned out. By that time, anybody that's a swimmer knows that you put so much time in the water to be good. And I wasn't that good. So the rewards from coming from swimming, I wasn't winning races. So I was looking for something else to do, and I found water polo. And so the combination
Interesting.
so for me, the combination of swimming and the physicality that's associated and the competition that's associated with a team sport in the water was really transformative for me. I really enjoyed that. Became president of that club, and we traveled around New England playing all kinds of teams and having just a great time. And has stayed with me over the years.
Wow. That's really, really cool. So post-college, you get into finance and you're working a few years out.
Yeah.
When did you start to get the bug and start to think about, pivoting, transitioning? Where did the whole SEAL idea come from?
It came about because of the economic realities of a crash in '88. So I was working for, again, that company, Colonial Mutual Funds, and a great company to work for. And I was doing something known as bank sales, so trying to get banks to sell our group of mutual funds. And that was based on the Glass-Steagall Act. That was new legislation that allowed the flexibility of banks to go ahead and sell mutual funds. And so I went from Boston and moved down to Tampa, but it was tough going. It was a new marketplace, and I was making a lot of money as a 24-year-old, but I also kind of was like, hey, I could be doing this 20 years from now. Is this really what you want to be doing with your life? And so, I was looking inward and started, and I think Top Gun was out at that point in time. I was like, man, that looks pretty good. That seems like a place where a place where I could learn some leadership skills and some life skills. And so I went into the recruiter and I said, what do you got? And he said, and he took a look at what I've done in the past, right? And saw the water polo stuff and said, hey, I want you to watch this tape. And he showed me the SEAL UDT tape. And I was like, holy smokes. They were doing scuba, right? And there was no bubbles coming out of their scuba rig. I was like, how in the world are they doing that? And I was hooked. And
so that was the naval recruiter?
Yeah, the naval recruiter in Boston. And I had 3 choices. I had to take a battery tests. And I said I wanted to be a SEAL first. And then the second one was an EOD, explosive ordnance disposal officer. And the third one would have been a diver, a Navy diver. By far, I also talked to some other folks that were going to be that were SEALs, and I was like, I was all over it. I thought this was the best way to live my best life.
So how does that work? Like, I'm imagining you're a naval recruiter and people walk in off the street all the time saying, hey, I'd like to be a SEAL. That sounds really cool. Like how do they know to take you seriously versus somebody else that passes through?
I don't think they do. They just were desperate at that point in time. You got to understand this is like before.
They couldn't have been that desperate. Come on.
This is a very average student, right? At a good college, but not a great college. But the demand to be a SEAL at that point in time, we're talking 88, was not like it is today. I don't think that I would get into the SEAL program today, given my academic performance and my athletic performance. The level has just increased so high. The bar is high.
So, okay. So I want to ask you a couple things here. Now, one, when you were still doing your doing your finance work, were you still involved in water polo at that point?
Yeah, I would still play a little bit with some masters teams.
And I could hear how much water polo, and you even said like water polo as a team sport was very influential on you. What were some of the things that you gained from water polo and just, let's say, team sports or being part of a team in general? Obviously, being just a swimmer itself, it's a very individualistic sport. It's all about you competing against others or even competing against just the clock for the most part. But obviously with water polo, you have to rely on others. What were some of those things that you pulled away from that?
So the first thing that you come away with it is a sense of toughness, right? Because you get there is the above water game and there's the underwater game, and you can get a lot. You could get away with a lot under the waters if you knew how to play correctly, right? So there was a physicality that was associated with it that was a lot different from anything that I'd done in swimming before. The second thing was, the reliance on your team and the kind of person that water polo that people gravitated towards that played water polo was the kind of person that I kind of wanted to hang out with. They were fun people, right?
And how did that then carry over to you saying, okay, I can take some of these, or did it even, let's say, like when you were thinking about it and you saw it, did you say some of these skills that I did with water polo, they could carry over into my training as a SEAL, or did that even come into mind?
It really didn't come into mind. I think it was one of the reasons why maybe the recruiter thought of putting me into the SEAL application process. The thing that more than anything that I would like to share is that at that point in the time in my life, I felt like I had a confidence, but it was an unrealized confidence. I felt like I could be a leader of people, but I didn't know how. And in comparison to the jobs that I had the confidence that I could do a better job, but I wanted to fill myself out in life experiences to do more than just say I thought I could do it.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said that before, that you were looking inward, so you were looking for a way to harness that leadership ability. And from what it sounds like to us, the SEALs just seemed like a perfect way for you to fulfill that inward goal of becoming a leader. Is that right? Did it just fit the bill? It was just all of a sudden like, boom, this is perfect.
Clicked.
Just what I need. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that it was the notion of service, right? And for the nation that really was kind of missing within business. And
Right.
for me, that really was a strong reason to go there, because I was taking a pay cut of more than half.
Right. Right.
And so I was going from, a nice style of living to something that definitely took me down a step. But it was worth it as far as I was concerned at that point in time in my life.
So how difficult was that reflection though? I mean, was this a series of you walking into the office and in the next few hours you're on a plane to get trained, or did you take a couple of weeks and figure out, yeah, this is really going to be the best thing for me because it's going to make sure that I'm taking care of that fulfillment aspect of things?
Yeah, what happened was that I left the job and I actually traveled in Europe for 6 weeks. And
Okay.
I went to Ireland on my own, Ireland all the way down to Germany and Greece. And while I was there, I found out that I got into the program.
Oh, wow. In Greece,
And
did you
so,
find out? Because that's a beautiful place to find out anything.
In Corfu. It was even
Oh
better
my
than
God.
Greece.
Yes.
Great place
Yes.
to celebrate.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
It was.
And how do you find out? So you're in Greece. Did they, send a telegram? Like how does that work?
They didn't ring up on the cell. That's for sure.
They called my parents and they said he's got to come home.
Oh, that's great.
Wow. So how long
of course
from that point was it before training started?
So the first thing that you do is you go to Officer Candidate School. And Officer Candidate School is in Newport, Rhode Island. And I reported, I think it was on the 25th or 26th, right after Thanksgiving of November 1988. And that's then for 3 or 4 months. And then I went straight out from there to Coronado, California for basic underwater demolition school.
So when you get out to California, I think of the great story when you start college. They say, take a look to your left, take a look to your right. Those two people will not be standing there at the end. Well, I think with the Buds program, that it's a legendary thing that people don't make it through. How many people did you start with?
Yeah, 103, and graduated. We officially graduated with, I think it's 40 some number. Approximately.
Wow.
But it was also one of the things that the number of the guys that you started with, that you finished with, was 20, approximately 20. And the rest of the other 20 were guys that rolled into the class because they had previously been injured and classed up with, in my case, class 163.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. That many injuries, because you have to imagine it's the toughest sport on earth, essentially, right? I mean, you are training to become,
Superhuman.
Yeah, destruction proof, really. I mean, from what I've read.
The thing I'd share with you guys is it's not during buds. It's actually after buds that you really learn your craft and it becomes harder. I mean, that's a wicket that you have to pass through, but that's just really the beginning.
So take us through training. What is that process? What are those days? What are you learning? Like, can you sort of take us through that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So you get there and you have about 6 weeks. There's 3 phases. Okay. There is, you wait until you class up. So that was about, again, don't quote me on exact time frames and dates, but this is the general feel for it. You wait till you class up, then you class up and be part of this group of 100 guys, and then you get ready through physical training on to be part of that class. Once you get part of that class, you go through 3 phases. There is the first phase, which gets you ready for Hell Week, where in Hell Week you are you're tested to your limits. And part of that testing is staying up for 4 nights in Hell Week. And then after that, after you get through Hell Week, you go through, let's see, there's a land warfare phase, and there's also a diving phase. And for the land warfare phase, they take you out to a place called San Clemente Island. You do small arms training and also demolitions, underwater demolitions. And then for diving, you get qualified. You start with open circuit, and then you transition over into closed circuit, which was that difference between scuba and no bubbles, bubbles versus no bubbles. So you can become a tactical combat diver.
All right, so just so that we can explain to folks when we keep saying, because we've mentioned the word a couple times, Bud School. What that really means is basic underwater demolition SEAL training. So that's where Buds comes from. So now you've done let's say, and that's what 6 weeks you said.
So the total time for Buds is approximately 8 months.
Oh, wow.
8 months. Okay. Wow. Geez. All right. So that's 8 months of just what seems to be intensive training at this point.
It is, but so for me, the mindset is if I don't make it through here, they're gonna have to take me out in a body bag. And that sounds kind of extreme right there, but you kind of have that mentality when you go in, because otherwise you're gonna ring out. And
actually that leads me right to my next question. All right, so I think a lot of us have seen kind of movies about SEALs and SEAL training. Is that true? The idea of the bell to ring out?
Yes.
That's absolutely true.
Absolutely true.
And I'm assuming that you have seen other candidates in there who you would say are probably just as superhuman as you, or you would think, and they ring out, and you're probably your jaw drops. I'm assuming.
Yeah, and not superhuman, obviously. It's
right.
It's persistence, and it's overcoming adversity.
As you look back and you compare yourself to the others, was there something different about you innately that you think helped get you through this process?
Yeah, if I'm being honest with you, it's that I'm not great at anything, but I'm really good at a lot of things. And so when you are in the top 20% of a lot of things, then you gravitate overall to being good.
You just made my hair stand on end with that kind of stuff, man, because what you're doing, I mean, there must have been, and help me understand it. There must have been days where you're like, I can't do this anymore. So how did you push through? What was that mental struggle like? Or were you always just going to the end? That was it. I mean, you said bring you out in a body bag. There's things called drown proofing. Somebody is trying to drown you, and you have to not drown. Basically, you've won if you don't drown. What was the mental part? And I know it could be very sensitive, and I'm not trying to make light of it. So please, help us understand, because it's a special person that goes through this.
It's funny that you bring that up, because I failed the first drown proofing. Oh, so I had to go through a second time. And so what do? They have you in a pool, and they have you in open circuit, right. So scuba, and they take your mask off. They take what is an octopus rig, which is connected on both sides of the tank, and they bring it over your head, and they tie it in a knot, and then they toss you around a little bit, and then you've got to untie the knot and bring it back over the top of your head, start breathing again. And I couldn't get the knot out. I had gotten to my limit the first time. And
so you're disoriented underwater when that happens, obviously, right?
Yeah, you got to be comfortable in the water.
Oh my God.
And so the second time I trained, and there was, for me, it was kind of a strange part in, aspect of my life, because there was just no way that I was not going to not make it. I didn't want to live with I didn't want to live with myself if I didn't make it. And that's for those folks that don't make it through. It's not a reflection on that person either. I want to make that clear.
So when do you know you made it? Like what is that moment? What is that last step where you've made it?
I mean, when you're walking across the stage and you get your orders to your next command.
But is there a moment where you're walking out of a drill, out of a test, out of the water, where you've just kind of left it all on the field and you recognize that you've crossed the finish line, or it's really not until your score comes in and you get your certification?
So you get all these scores as you're going along, so you know how you're doing, but you never know when you're going to get injured. You never know when you're going to get a fracture, a shin splints to the point where you can't run anymore. So it's always a process. You don't want to take anything for granted.
And then what are the emotions afterwards? I think about all those people who, were messing with you throughout the process and making it hard, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you recognize why you're doing it, but are there any hard feelings afterwards? Do you leave that behind? What are the emotions after you've finished?
So you don't have any animosity towards your instructors. I didn't. They were terrific. And they're just trying to teach you the lessons that you need to learn when you get into serious circumstances. And how do you be a leader? And so, in a sense, that's what I was kind of looking for. It was the first step along that path. And so they were tremendous. Of course, I was proud. I was proud of myself, and that doesn't go away. I still look back on that right now as we're talking. I'm extremely proud of my performance during that time frame.
As well as you should be.
It should be.
You talked about injury before and guys that get injured, and you said about 20 rejoined your group. How does the injury thing work? Because it's such a big part of this. Can you step away, rehab the injury, jump back in right where you were? Is there a waiting list? How does that? And do you just get a year and then that's it? You're done?
So, this is back in the day. This is 30 years ago. So I don't know.
Maybe different today. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. But back in the day, what happened is if you've made it through Hell Week, then you could class up, and you got injured, you could then pick up another class. If you didn't make it through Hell Week, or you got injured before Hell Week, then you would have to go through that first phase all over again.
Right.
And so those three phases, the initial phase, the diving phase, and land warfare, is that you would then class up at one of those. Does that make sense?
Yep. Sure.
Yeah. So, what was your first assignment coming out of Buds?
Yeah, 1989, and I got assigned to SEAL Team 4, which was my first choice, and that is they had a area of operations of the Southern Command, which, if you guys remember, was when the invasion of Panama happened, and with Noriega, the then Panamanian General Noriega, and so I thought that was the best place to go at that point in time.
So, okay, we're entering the tricky part of the interview. Let's talk about it for a second. Yeah. You were a SEAL for, help me with the number, 10, 11 years?
Yeah, 12 years.
12 years. I'm sure there are things you could talk about. I'm sure there are things that you can't talk about. We certainly are not going to know the difference. So we want to go as far as we can without you, breaking protocol. So what were some of those missions that you're super proud of, if you could talk about them or be vague? But what did you do in that time?
Well, what's an example?
That's 12. Yeah, 12 years. Tell us a little bit about that. Yeah.
I'll give you 3 snapshots. The first one is the time that I spent down in South America. And so there I was, as an officer, I was assistant officer in charge, and then also eventually an officer in charge of a platoon. And that means of 16 guys that deploy together.
What was your
My highest rank? My highest rank was a commander. I attained that after I left the SEALs as a reservist. As an active duty SEAL, my highest rank was a lieutenant commander, which is an 04. So for the first 5 years, I was deploying down to South America to places like Colombia and Honduras, and stationed in Panama, right on the Panama Canal, which was amazing. And then doing counter-narcotics training with partner nations like Colombia. And going into those areas, remote areas, like the Putumayo River down in Colombia, which is between the border of Colombia and Ecuador, and seeing that beauty and seeing how the countries worked, being able to get fluent in Spanish was a really terrific time. The next phase that I'll mention is 97 through 99, and there I got qualified as a SEAL delivery vehicle pilot. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with, but the SEAL delivery vehicle is a wet submarine, and it comes out of the back of what's known as a dry dock shelter on the top of a submarine, and you go and do naval special warfare missions from there.
Interesting.
So,
Oh boy.
so being a pilot and doing things like just looking at the dry dock shelter out the back and seeing, we used to do training in a place called Vieques in Puerto Rico, and looking out the back of the proverbial submarine garage and seeing the bioluminescence coming off of the back of the submarine propeller with 100-foot visibility was just absolutely amazing.
Wow.
Oh my
Wow.
God.
Okay, that's two. You have a third?
Yeah, Persian Gulf. There I was a task unit commander, so in charge of about 21 or 22 guys on an aircraft carrier, and that was the USS Roosevelt. And we went over to Bosnia, through the Mediterranean, and then through into the Gulf, Persian Gulf, where we were doing operations there, and that was extremely rewarding as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, all of these things, it sounds like, you were a pilot. You're doing various functions in those three snapshots too, which is what I find most fascinating. So what kinds of things, don't even talk about mission exactly, but what kinds of things did they have you doing? Were you going behind enemy lines? Of course, you're driving vehicles, you're in a sub vehicle. Was the sub single manned? Like, are you like going in and like going under and jumping on land essentially?
Yeah. Let me give you an example. One of the things in the Persian Gulf that we used to do was something called visit board search and seizure. And what we would do is take over a ship, a cargo ship. And the way that we would do that is at night by fast roping from helicopters onto the back of the moving cargo ship.
Oh my
Wow.
God. That's
And
like,
so we would have weapons.
That's like how the
We would have
movies.
I was going to avoid saying that's like the movies, but that's like the movies.
The movies.
It was crazy
Yeah,
dangerous
that's-
and crazy
wow.
fun simultaneously.
Yeah, I'll bet. And you have to at some point. I hate harping on this point, but I'm going to do it again. At some point, you're like staring into the abyss on the back of some vehicle, about to jump into God knows where. You must have said, "Am I making good life choices right now?"
Actually, no, that really is a really good question, because like, do you have to be a little bit crazy to do this job?
I don't think so. I think more than anything, when I hear you guys say that, is the thing that I think about is, Lord, just let me get it right. Let me not screw up.
Yeah, there you go.
So, Tushar asked a very good setup question for where my mind was going, which is, what is the lifestyle of a Navy SEAL? Meaning, you're going off on these missions, you're living in different parts of the world, you're giving all of yourself to your country and to a cause. Can you have a normal life? Like, how much notice do you have before a mission? How long are missions? Can you date as a Navy SEAL? Like, what is the lifestyle of a SEAL?
So what tends to happen is you get assigned to, this is, again, old information, okay? It's not organized the way it is now. But from my standpoint, my historical basis is that you would get assigned to a platoon, and that platoon would have somewhere like an 18-month workup, where you would do all this training in submarine operations, in air operations like HALO, high altitude, low opening, land warfare, all these different components in order to qualify the platoon to be able to be to deploy and be a capable unit. Then you would deploy for 6 months, and then you'd come back and you'd stand down for a while, and then you'd repeat that process, especially for enlisted. And for officers, you typically stay at a command for 2 to 3 years, and then you move to a different command to try and check off a lot of your responsibilities as you matriculate and become a more senior officer.
So do you still consider yourself at this point, now retired so many years, still a member of the special operators community? Like, are you still very welcomed in? And I mean, obviously, look, you're teaching at the War College in California, but and I wouldn't say bud. It's wrong for me to use the word bud in this case, because you are still obviously teaching in the submariner community. But in this sense, like, do you still consider yourself part of that special operators community as well.
Absolutely. But I don't make, I'm not in contact with everybody as maybe I could be. There's a little bit of separation that has happened over the years. You don't, hang out with as many of your buds as you want to. So there is a little bit of a separation.
Why is that?
The responsibilities associated with, having a family, raising the family.
Sure.
Your priorities change a little bit.
So to that point, Doug, when you talk about priorities changing, how do you know it's time to pivot away from being active and to pivot towards something else? Does that moment reveal itself to you?
Yeah. So let's see. In 1995, after 5 years at SEAL Team 4, I came to the Naval Post Graduate School in Monterey and met my wife, then Julie Franson, and spent 2 great years here. And then we left, and we always thought that we kind of wanted to come back here and maybe raise a family. And so then fast forward to 1999, and after the Persian Gulf, with the task unit commander, is I did a job in Washington, D.C. at Naval Sea Systems Command, and knew at that point in time that we just wanted to transition back. It was too hard on us in our particular relationship to spend the kind of time apart that we knew we would if I continued to be a SEAL.
So were you married as a SEAL?
Yes.
And what was that like for her? Meaning, you're going off on a mission. Are you going to come back? Like what was that like for her?
It was tough. You'd have to talk to her about that, but it's, the not knowing,
Yep.
right? And not being able to discuss stuff was always, difficult.
How old were you at that point?
Let's see, in 32 was when I got married.
So I have to think this is an issue with a lot of your colleagues too. I mean, everybody, I would think goes through this in one form or another. We all have relationships in our life, whatever they might be. How long did it take, for instance, your wife to get into that? Because you signed up to be a SEAL, she didn't. So at a certain point, she's signing up to be a SEAL's wife, right? So was that a long transition for her?
I'm not sure it was ever a transition or she entirely accepted that, right? Because I can give you a story is with the SEAL delivery vehicle is that I got stung. The short story is that I came out of the back of the submarine and came up to the surface, and while I was coming up to the surface, I got stung by a sea wasp, and I went into anaphylactic shock.
Oh my God!
And she didn't find out about it until a couple of days later when I was in the hospital. And so, that happens.
Yep.
And it's not easy to deal with, right?
So, Doug, when you decided that it was time, what was your thought process? What did you think could be next for you?
Oh, I didn't know at all. What I started getting interested in was robotics, because my last job in the Navy was at the Naval Sea Systems Command. And I was in charge of a program that was introducing the first autonomous underwater vehicle into the Navy. And I really enjoyed it because it got me smarter on aspects that I knew about undersea with respect to the SEAL delivery vehicle. Like, why was it navigating? What does an autopilot mean? What's the position estimation as a function of distance? Those kinds of fundamental questions I got a better understanding to and just got more fascinated about, and kind of realized that the future for unmanned systems was right there, that it was going to be something that I could enjoy over a 20 or a 30-year period. So we left the Navy, and we had one thing in mind, and is that was return to Monterey. I didn't know what I was going to do. My wife is a speech therapist, so she knew what she was going to do, but I didn't know what I was going to do. So I came back without a job and found my way to the postgraduate school and have stayed there ever since.
So how'd that happen? How'd you find your way back to postgraduate school at that point? Was it just like, essentially, like, who did you speak to? You say, you know what, I'm looking, I'm trying to find something. this is what I'm interested in now. What should I do?
Yeah, there was a professor, a guy by the name of Don Brutzman, that took me under his wing. And there's also, I worked for a company that was working for MPS, and they saw my work, and then they pulled me into the school. And then I started working for what was one of my strong mentors over the years, a guy by the name of Tony Healy, who was the chairman for the mechanical engineering department. And I've kind of stayed in that department ever since. And he got me even more interested on robotics.
So you mentioned something a moment ago about, your understanding of being a pilot yourself and how these crafts moved through the water, et cetera, got you into robotics, et cetera. Did you, at that point, you said you knew this would take you through like the next 10, 20 years. So you're thinking that far down the road as you're making this decision?
I kind of was. It's kind of interesting that you bring that out, because I kind of looked at it from an investment standpoint. It's like, what's my return going to be for personal satisfaction, not monetary return, but personal satisfaction over a long history.
Yeah.
And I kind of took a look at that and I was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff that I could really get into right here. It just kind of made sense to me and who I was at that stage
That's
of my
insightful.
life.
Yeah, that was a moment of insight for you that really blossomed your career into an entirely different second half, that blows my mind, So kudos to you. So what's your first step? You start teaching. Did you enjoy teaching at that point?
No, it was all about research. So for the next 5 years or so, I just did research programs where we would try and instill autonomy as computer algorithms on board the vehicle to try and give it more capability than it had. So to try and give it more, so quote unquote, independence. So one example of that would be obstacle avoidance. That the underwater vehicle by itself didn't have the ability to recognize and avoid objects forward of its position, just like the SEAL delivery vehicle doesn't. And so what we did was do the computer processing on board using a forward-looking sonar that would recognize objects and go around them, which sounds pretty rudimentary, right? But to institute that as a system, you combine together sensor information with position estimation, with path planning, and with mapping. And you've got to bring all those things together to get them to work properly together.
I mean, it sounds like a way to build an unmanned navy under this. I mean, that sounds like the direction that you're heading in.
Yeah. There's a lot of effort right now into developing unmanned systems.
I always make fun of people and say, it's not rocket science. This sounds like rocket science.
Yeah. I don't think so. It's pretty straightforward.
But, well, there it is right there. So that it comes easy for you. Was that part of it? Is that you were seeing rewards, you were seeing projects, fulfilled, and you were being fulfilled because of that, and that fueled you more? Like, how then do you have the next 2 decades of your career in robotics where you're a giant? I mean, what you've done with underwater robotics, from what I've read, is astounding. So how does this matriculate from this point?
So first of all, it's recognizing an opportunity when one exists. That feeds to what you think might be your strengths, not now, but in the future. And then it's knowing who you are and the places that are going to keep you interested. So for me, the things that keep me interested is the ability to define my own future. And so within research, I put out proposals, but I get to choose what I want to do. So one of the things that is important to me is to travel to interesting places with good people. So one of those things was known as it's called NEMO. Your listeners can look it up, but it's NASA Extreme Environments Mission Objectives. And what it is we got together with NASA astronauts that go into a facility it's off the Key Largo. And it's Aquarius is what it's called. It's underwater habitat. And so they go into this, underwater tube and live there for a week. And what they're thinking about is, being in space and doing missions in space and maybe even in Mars. So the question becomes is how do these aquanauts, which they call themselves, interact with robots on Mars? And so we took our vehicles there. We had torpedo-shaped vehicle and also a box-shaped vehicle that was much more able to work closely. The torpedo-shaped vehicle turned out to be the search vehicle. It would do a survey of the larger area and then come back with the information about recommendations as to where to go. And then the aquanauts would go out on their air systems and go with the other underwater vehicle, and they would then grab samples, and that robot would help them get those samples.
Normally we tell people, hey, how do you get a job like this? I honestly don't want other people to get a job like this. I want you to have a job like this because you're the only person. This blows my mind to have a conversation like this.
Yeah.
So
I got to give you one more story. Can I give you one more?
Please.
We got a chance to go. So the Navy, once every 2 years, has an exercise on the Arctic ice. It's known as ICEX. And so we took our underwater vehicles, actually our aerial vehicles as well, took a team up there, and we deployed the vehicles under ice with submarines that show up. And the way that the submarines show up is that they find the location. They come from like Groton, Connecticut, and come all the way up within 800 miles of the North Pole, and they come surfacing up, and their mast breaks the ice right next to our ice camp. So we were there for 3 weeks, I think it was, just doing ice operations with underwater vehicles in minus 20 degree temperatures. And it was just awesome.
Sounds incredible.
God. It sounds difficult.
Well,
it sounds like your SEAL training came at hand.
And so there's a piece on 60 Minutes called Arctic Frontiers with Leslie Stahl, who was amazing. What a national icon. And she was just amazing. So she interviewed us.
I'm curious. So all three of us watched the segment on 60 Minutes preparing for this.
Oh, did you?
And the way she positioned it was as if she lived there for a week. Was she actually there? Or was she flying to the Hilton somewhere nearby?
No, she was there.
Wow.
That's great.
And I'd have breakfast with her, and she'd be talking about her grandkids. And I'm like,
oh, my goodness.
I'm on the North Pole talking with Leslie Stahl, and we're having this great conversation over breakfast.
That's great.
It doesn't get any better than that.
What was she living in? A tent?
Yeah.
Wow.
So
I'm telling you right now, Leslie Stahl was saying to herself, I'm talking to Doug Horner.
Right.
It's unbelievable. I'll tell my grandkids this later on.
Seriously.
Doug, I got to ask. So, I mean, look, it's hard to kind of transition then from saying, obviously, you love the research. You're a researcher. We can hear that. So what is that transition then like? Do you prefer being a researcher, or do you now enjoy the idea of being a teacher and being more of a class teacher at this point?
What I really enjoy is teaching students that have a background within the Navy. Like a lot of the times we get these Navy lieutenants that have maybe 5 to 7 years in. So they have good ideas on what they want to improve. And then they come to you and say, why don't we do this way? And I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And so we come up with a research program. And I've got one student right now that is an oceanographer, and he's got experience with underwater vehicles, and he wants to understand sediment transport. And we're going to use the underwater vehicles to understand sediment transport near the interface between rivers and oceans.
Let me ask you. Actually, that's a really good kind of question. A great question to kind of ask there. The notion of generational change there, right? So we talk a lot about here about this, and joke a bit about how kids today maybe don't understand what it was like for us growing up without cell phones, without computers, etc. Now, how do you, let's say, incorporate the ideas of some of the kids that you meet now, these younger officers that you meet now, and incorporate that into the work that you're doing? And is there a good synergy between, let's say, new and old, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that the students that I interact with are amazing. They are smarter. They have a great head on their shoulders. I'm constantly impressed by the comparison between where I was at that age and where they are. And so, being the chair of the USW academic group is that I want to make sure that they have a good experience, because I see the level of effort that by and large they're putting forward, and how much they care.
That's great. I mean, we need smart people, right? We need smart people to lead us to new things and go further.
Yeah.
You keep talking about an aspect of your what you do now that I really want to just know a little bit more about, and that's like the research proposal. Like, I'm listening to you. You're clearly like probably the smartest person I've ever talked to, and incredibly successful. So how do you get paid? Is this a government contract? Is the government pay? You put out a research proposal, somebody decides yay or nay, but if they say yes, they do the funding. How does it work? How do you make a living doing this, I guess, is my question. Because you're going to all places and all over the world doing amazing things, and as you said, you decide what you want to research. So yeah, like, how does that work?
It's a great question. So first of all, I am a Department of the Navy civilian employee for the Naval Post Graduate School. So I get a portion of my salary that comes from the USW academic group, but the majority of my salary comes from research initiatives. And those research initiatives are obtained through proposals that I write on a yearly basis to organizations like the Office of Naval Research and DARPA and some other various organizations, but those two are the dominant ones. And you have a sense as to, because you're attending, robotics conferences, because you're attending the conferences that are associated with development of capabilities within the Navy, and that you have all these operational folks that you're engaging with at the school, you have a notion as to what is needed to go forward for unmanned systems, and especially autonomy with unmanned systems. So that's kind of the process in a nutshell.
Yeah.
All right. Oddly enough, before we were talking to you, we were talking about, hey, how much interaction do you have with DARPA? So it seems like a great deal, to be honest with you. But I kind of want to I want to ask you a question about this notion of the future. And obviously, you talked a great deal about seeing this career for you as 20, 30 years out. Has this changed your viewpoint on the future of war and warfare?
Yes. If I was in a policy position, which I'm not, is that my threshold to enter war as I've gotten older is higher. I just want to make sure that we avoid it at all costs. And that wasn't necessarily my view at 27 or 28 years old. Nor was it really my position or place. If I thought like that, it would have been dangerous for me and the people that I worked with, I think.
Wow. And
so that mentality has shifted over time.
Because of the damage that would be done if you entered war?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, You look at the concern with China right now, and it's a peer versus peer potential conflict that would wreak significant damage all around. And that's a heavy price to pay.
With no victor. So, Doug, this brings up a similar question for me when it pertains to the climate and our planet. You've been in a very unique position to be underwater, to be so deeply immersed in nature, to be in the Arctic, to have seen all these different things. What type of change have you seen over the past 30 years? And when it comes to a tipping point, from your vantage point, where are we from a climate perspective?
So, I'm no subject matter expert in that domain. All it would be anecdotal based upon, what we've all witnessed. And it is, from a generational standpoint, it is very worrisome that we're leaving this to our children and our children's children.
So, Doug, last question. As we look forward, if there's one more huge thing that you want to achieve or accomplish before you one day retire, what would that be?
I want to excel at retirement. I want to, when the time's right, I want to go out and do some traveling with my wife and enjoy that to its fullest. So I want to be of an age where I've got the mobility and the inquisitive about different cultures and learn different things, and maybe pick up an instrument or two.
Oh yeah,
and with that,
Play trombone.
Too short instrument.
That's right.
Advice for a young person, somebody coming into the work world today, if they're inspired to be a SEAL, if they're inspired to be in robotics, what advice do you have for young people in today's environment?
I guess the first thing I'd say, it's not about the money, at least for me. Never was. Then the next is to find people that you genuinely enjoy working around. If you can get those two right, and the third one is to find a process or a field that allows you to be engaged, that interests you. Those are the three really core things.
Well, it certainly sounds like you've achieved all of those things. And Doug, this has been a remarkable conversation. Thank you, A, for your service, and B, thank you so much for joining us today.
You guys made it easy. You guys are good interviews.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding? We're going to talk for another 2 hours.
I know. But you're great. Thank you, Doug. Thank you.
So that was a great way to kick off season 3 of No Wrong Choices. What a remarkable person. What a fascinating conversation with Doug Horner.
We could have spoke for another 2 hours and probably still not have scratched the surface of what we really wanted to get to. I am fascinated by this notion of, and I absolutely believe what he said is that having worked now in robotics and autonomous, essentially autonomous war, that it's absolutely changed his viewpoint on what war is now, right? And he even spoke about it, like how he's transitioned from what war meant to him as a young man, what it meant to him as a middle-aged man, and what it means to him now, and what war would truly mean to all of us on that stage. It's so fascinating in so many ways. But what I really was actually, what I really took away from that whole discussion was I know that, and I know I joked about it in the interview itself about how, hey, look, I don't want everyone doing this job that this man is doing because there are very few people who should be doing it. But at the same time, we need smart people to do jobs like this because, yes, we need people who are futurists. And he is a futurist.
Yeah, there's so many things we learned in this interview. I think the most important thing is what a genuine guy he is. He answered questions thoughtfully, honestly. But, the guy's fearless. The guy was so determined. Talk about failure is not an option. When he's going through SEAL training and we're asking him, like, your darkest thoughts in those moments. And he's like, I was not going to fail. It wasn't even in his thought process. So the determination is what I take from this. There were also so many parts about his youth that, him switching swimming competition and then going into water polo and being part of a team. We all think that him being a part of a team and seeing how important that was in his life lent itself to the SEALs later. It was a brotherhood with the SEALs, right? That's the biggest team there is, the best team, there is. So I found that fascinating. And I think that was an important part of his life. Even playing ping pong, reflexes, things like that. He just mentioned so many little things that you could see why it added up to this guy is going to be a very successful guy. And, I think we also learned about when he switched to robotics, how he's able to make that a career. There's no path that I've read in any book of, okay, you're going to do this and then you're going to make, arrangements with the government to better understand underwater robotics and you're going to make a living at it. Where's that manual? Yeah.
Yeah, where was that? Where was that in the high school?
That in the guidance?
I never got that class. I never got that.
My guidance counselor missed that class, So here's a guy who's determined as could be, super smart, obviously, physically imposing, but fearless. And failure wasn't an option. I love that.
There's an old saying that I use every once in a while, and I've heard other people use, is that sometimes it's good to be a jack of all trades and a master at none. And really, he basically said, I know a lot of things really well, and I don't really know any one thing very well. But if you know at least a bunch of things very well, it all kind of comes together, and you can become a master at certain things, which is what he's.
And
really
he knew
done.
it was a strength.
Yeah, it becomes a strength.
Right.
It totally becomes a strength, and that's really what kind of maybe was the most fascinating part of this entire interview. Just the idea of maximizing as many portions of your knowledge as you can.
Yeah, and that sort of leads me into what I'm reflecting upon, which is composure and perspective. When I think about what is a SEAL, like what is that person who's able to put themselves out there in this way and to endure so much and to hang in there and to achieve the things that you have to in order to get to that point? Like, you have to be wired in a really unique and different way. And the way he talked about his journey, the way he talked about his life was very matter of fact, meaning I did this, I didn't like that, so I did that. I didn't really, necessarily want to do this, so I did that. And everything was, I just did it. Like there wasn't this major revelation. There wasn't this major, oh my God moment. It was just, this is what I did next. And he just seemed to have that composure and just great perspective about, this is my journey. I'm putting myself out there and this is where I'm headed, which I just thought was absolutely fascinating.
And working with good people. Like he mentioned that too, right? We talk about that all the time. You want to be someone who people want to work with and have a good time, no matter what you're doing, building robots, Navy SEAL, like it doesn't matter. You want to be someone people want to work with.
And that's how I feel about the two of you every single time I hear your voices. So with that, Doug, thank you so much for joining this episode of No Wrong Choices. We also thank you for joining us. If this or another journey story inspired you to think of a friend who could be a great guest, please let us know by sending us a note via the contact page of NoWrongChoices.com. As I mentioned off the top, please support us by following No Wrong Choices on your favorite podcasting platform while giving us a 5-star rating. And then last but not least, we encourage you to join the No Wrong Choices community by connecting with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and X by searching for No Wrong Choices. On behalf of Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea, I'm Larry Samuels. Thank you again for joining us, and remember, there are no wrong choices on the road to success. We learn from every experience.